Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second annual Toronto Domestic Violence Symposium, 2015. The task in front of us to bring awareness about the abuses that men and boys are facing in Canada and, in fact, around the world is a very difficult path, a very difficult road. I'm just going to get into the nitty-gritty as to what we're dealing with and what we're up against. In Ontario, I have been told that about $140 million is spent on domestic violence causes. That would include domestic violence shelters. It would include organizations that advocate against domestic violence. But there's one fundamental important element that's missing in all of these areas, and that is the understanding and the acknowledgement that men and boys are equal victims of domestic violence. In fact, this event has received zero funding, not a dime. All of it has been put together by fellow advocates, people that are poor, people that are working very hard, people that are broken. And we're going to be working very, very hard that we are properly funded so that we're not struggling to put together events to cover basic costs. When the Ontario government is spending $140 million a year, it stands to reason that an organization such as this should get some amount of funding, something. Without any further ado, our first speaker is Vernon Beck. Vernon Beck is the founder of Canada Court Watch. He is the watchdog of the courts, if you will. He has 2 decades of experience working with families, children, in various different areas, including domestic violence, which, in fact, I was just in the hallway, and he was again dealing with somebody that was calling him. I know that his phone never stops to ring. Let's put our hands together for Vernon Beck.
Thank you, Tella. Thank you, Bert. Okay. Let me get plugged in here.
So I get to plug you in.
No, I think we'll hear.
This goes in your pocket.
Okay, well.
What happened?
It's fine. It's nothing. I'm just letting you know that the applause spiked
Okay.
a lot.
It's in your upper pocket here.
Okay. Make sure we're ready to go here.
Did you want that on there?
Yeah, I think I know the button here, so I think we'll be fine here. Okay, thank you, Attila. My name is Vernon Beck. As Attila said, I'd like to thank certainly Attila and the Maltese Charitable Service Trust for inviting me over here tonight to speak about the issue of domestic violence. As Attila said, I've been, in the family court industry for about 20 years. I started Canada Court Watch, around 1995, it's been. And although our organization started focusing on the courts, family courts, we do a lot of Children's Aid Society work, people affected by Children's Aid. I run across a lot of cases of where domestic violence policies are adversely affecting children and families. And based on the 20 years experience that I've had, one thing I can say as a Canadian, I am utterly ashamed at the way that our government, the way that some of the agencies are spending our money, because a lot of this money in this area is being spent to literally destroy children and families. Throughout the course of my work, I interview children. I'm probably one of the few advocates who has videotaped interviews with children for a number of years, and I question them about how the family courts and the involvement of the domestic violence industry has on them. And as Attila just said a little while ago, as I was standing out in the hallway, I had a victim, a male victim of domestic violence, who has, I think in about the last year, been jailed about 4 times. One time jailed for 17 days, I believe it was for sending flowers to his ex-girlfriend. And there was never any violence involved. In fact, he's been the subject of quite a bit of violence himself. Now, I guess I've got about an hour. Is that what's slotted in for me? Because I'll move on to, let's see, I'll get this. Okay, there it goes. So I've got a little PowerPoint presentation here that will, I guess, summarize some of my experience with the domestic violence industry in Canada. This is our group's Facebook page from Canada Court Watch. We get a regular visits by people from all over Canada, pretty heavily traveled to our site. We've got Canada Court Watch website as well. And from what I've been told by our webmaster, we're probably fairly highly ranked in the Google, so we get a lot of hits every year on our website. I guess that accounts why we get a lot of these spammers that try to get onto our site all the time, asking us to advertise and put things on there. So we get quite a few hits, but we have quite a following on Facebook. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the domestic violence in Canada today. Button appears to be working in one direction, but not in the other. Let's see if I can use the keyboard here, maybe. Okay, looks like I'll have to use the keyboard. In my opinion, certainly based on my 20 years, I can say that the domestic violence has turned into an industry in this country where there's a lot of money being paid out, a lot of money being made by individuals, professionals, who in a sense rely on this industry being sustained. I could get into a whole list of things. There's domestic violence counselors, there's victim services units, there are the psychologists, there are the psychiatrists, you name it. There are the people who run the courses for, I think in Ontario here I think it's called the PARS program, where men who allegedly have been accused of assaulting their wives have to attend, and before they can attend the course, they have to sign a declaration admitting that they were guilty. Okay, and that's where a lot of these courses they're basically making money. This is a slide that was made up by one of our supporters, who I think it puts it in a nutshell what's happening today. You'll get a family coming in. For whatever reason, they've gotten involved with the family court system. They come out of the court system totally destroyed. Their kids are destroyed. And as the slide shows, out the back door runs the judge, the Children's Aid Society, and the lawyers. Money in hand. And one of the biggest complaints I've had over the 20 years is that I would say that 95% of the people that I've spoken to, most of them say that in the end they all feel that it was their own lawyers who ripped them off the most. They did not get value for the money they paid to either defend themselves in family court or in the domestic violence courts or in the criminal courts. And they literally go broke. That one individual that just called me about 10 minutes ago in the hallway spent almost $50,000, and he told me that his lawyer had never spent 1 minute in a courtroom. And he suddenly smartened up. Now he's representing himself. Some of the agencies that benefit from the domestic violence industry and the breakup of families, Law enforcement agencies, women's shelters are a big sector that can get a lot of money. Victim services and crown attorneys. I see brochures. You go to the courthouse, I see brochures, victim services unit. They'll even supply you with an advocate to go to court with you and tell you how to beat the other side. It's all about beating, winning. And that seems to be the way it is. Once you're perceived as a victim, there are agencies out there teaching the victims now how to victimize the other side. Rather than trying to bring some sanity and to bring some mediation and some sense back into things, they're there to only, quite often, to make matters worse. Child protection agencies, one of the biggest things that they have now to get involved with families is family conflict. They refer to it as parental conflict. That is now a big reason that they use now to come in to get involved. Take your children. I see it over and over and over again now today. The Family Responsibility Office, FRO as it's called in Toronto, that's the agency that collects child support. I spoke to one person just yesterday here in Toronto. The guy was working in a body shop, doesn't make a lot of money. He makes about $30,000 a year. He owes the Family Responsibility Office, he owes them over $100,000. They've taken away his license. He has the kids, he has his children every other weekend. They love him. He says, I can't even take them for a drive. And he says, my wife, the mother of the children, lives quite comfortably. She doesn't need the $100,000 because she's got a good job and she makes more than him. But she says, I can't even take the kids out for a drive. I can't go anywhere with my kids in a car because they've taken my driver's license. So, in these agencies make money. And of course, everybody who's associated with the legal system, from lawyers to judges, right down the line, everybody is getting paid. They're either getting paid by their clients or they're getting paid by tax dollars. And from what I've seen in recent years, there appears to be more of these agencies and workers getting paid from tax dollars now. People going on legal aid. So all this tax money is being filtered down into the domestic violence industry. Talk a little bit about domestic violence with police agencies. Here's a man that I interviewed a number of years back. He was arrested. He was driving down, for those who know Toronto, I think Danforth. It's a major road here in Toronto. It's a major thoroughfare. He was driving down Danforth on an evening. It was probably about 7 o'clock at night. Got home. Police pulled in and called him. And he got home. Police wanted to see him. He went down the station. He was arrested based on a call from his wife that she saw him in his company van following her down this major thoroughfare in Toronto. I think it was Danforth Avenue. He didn't even see her. He was driving a company van. The company probably had 20 other vans just like his, but based on that, he was arrested and thrown in jail. The van was put in the police parking lot. He was not allowed to use the phone. He could not call his employer to let them know, I've got your van here and I can't get it back to work. He was kept in jail for 4 days. He was fired in the meantime because he could not reach his employer. The police would not allow him to call. And he basically lost his job. And in the 4 days while he was there, the wife got on an airplane, took the 2 children, and was gone. Just like that. She used the arrest so that she could get out of Toronto and fly out. She flew down into the States to meet a boyfriend. And this guy's a nice guy. You couldn't meet a nicer guy, honest, hardworking, the type of guy, the type of father that we need in this country. Talk about police. Here's a situation. I'm not sure how clear it is from your angle here, but this is a teenage boy. He's about 14 years of age. He's in handcuffs. You can't see his feet very clear, but he has no shoes on. He's in his sock feet. The police walked into his, this was in the summertime last year. He was sleeping in the basement of his aunt's house visiting. And the police came into the home without a warrant, went down to the basement, pulled the kid out of bed, handcuffed him, dragged him out of the house in his sock feet, put him in the back of a police cruiser, took him to the police station, and this is the Ontario Provincial Police, and then threw him in a jail cell. They told the kid he could call a lawyer. Well, he called me. That was the first place he called. And because I had been working with him and his father in family court. Well, the bottom line is the kid had left his mother's home, had been living with his father for about a few weeks, and the mother called the Children's Aid Society and said the boy had run away. The Children's Aid called the police and arrested him because the Children's Aid wanted to speak to him. That was their answer, because I spoke to the officer on the phone. I asked the officer, I told the boy, turn me over to the officer. At the police station there, I asked the officer, I said, sir, how long have you been a police officer? And he said, 15 years. I said, I don't know whether you realize or not. I said, you just made an unlawful arrest. And I said, if you don't let that boy out pretty quick, I said, your career is going to be toast. And I guess it got the officer thinking, because they released the boy right immediately on the spot. But this shows the ignorance of even police forces as to what's going on. Mother makes a phone call, makes some dumb allegation, and the police go and throw some young kid in jail, completely unlawful arrest, under something like that. Here's another father I interviewed a while back, and I interviewed the children involved as well. He had 3 boys. I interviewed the kids. The kids described to me on video how mom would get drunk, would yell and scream, beat up their dad, do all kinds of crazy things. He described an incident, and it's on our website. You can see this video if you wish to go. You can see the interview with him on the Canada Court Watch website. But he describes how the wife came in, was so drunk, tried to get at him, he went into the washroom, broke the door down on the bathroom. Now, he said the bathroom was one of those little powder rooms that was only like 3 feet wide. So he said when the door broke, of course, he's against the wall, and of course the door can't go any further because, the wall's right behind him. So the wife couldn't reach around to get him. But he said he called the police for help. And he says when the police came, and it was in my jurisdiction of Halton, Ontario, he said when the police came, he says the first thing that happened, he says he was surrounded by these police officers, and he says one of the female officers went in and asked the mother, who was passed out on the bed, "Are you okay, honey? Did he hurt you?" And yet he was the one that called the police for help. And the kids told me this went on all the time. Was she ever arrested? No. Was he arrested and given a hard time? Of course. It was horrible. Nobody would listen to him. Nobody would listen to his children. In this case here, the mother could do no wrong. He's moved back to England. That's where he originally was from. He moved back to England. Talking about women's shelters. We have millions and millions of dollars are spent on women's shelters. This young girl I interviewed, her mother actually called me from a women's shelter, and this girl's mother said, "I'm really angry at what's going on in this women's shelter." And she says, "I want you to talk to my children." And this is the one interview I did with the daughter. But this girl told me something that just literally shocked me. And it's on the slide there. This little girl testified how she was shown a video about daddies beating up mummies at the women's shelter, supposedly a children's program. And the mother was angry because she wasn't allowed to go in. The shelter staff said, this is for the kids only. We like to have them to go in without the mothers, and they'll be well taken care of. Well, yeah, they were well taken care of. This girl told me how the workers showed them a video of men beating up women, and she was told that that was going to happen to her when she grew up, that her boyfriend or her husband were going to do the same as what these men on this video were doing. Now, the mother was livid, and when she called me this, and I've interviewed her as well, and she was telling me about the abuse going on in there as well, about the threats, kids beating each other up in these shelters, and she said the workers were actually taking many of the donations for themselves. They had a donation room, and the workers from the shelter were actually helping themselves to the donations that members of the public were making. Here's another woman who was in a Toronto shelter. She said she witnessed all kinds of abuse in there, women fighting, children fighting, physically fighting with their fists, swearing. And she said that she was told that if she did not come across with sex with some of the lesbian workers there, that she was not allowed to go in to get any of the donations in the donation room. And while they were helping her, supposedly giving her places to refer her to help her out, she was sent to a lesbian lawyer. And she said it was made very clear to me, I either put out or I don't get services. Again, you can see this video. It's on our website. She'll describe it in detail. Just visit CanadaCourtWatch.com. You can see the video for yourself. So over the years, certainly many of these women's shelters, they, in a sense, they're not helping women. They're not helping with domestic violence. They're only spreading the myth about domestic violence. They are, in many cases, causing harm to children. And on top of that, I mentioned on the slide here that many of these shelters, you're bound to a code of silence. You sign a document that says you are not allowed to say anything about what you see or hear inside the shelter. And then you're not allowed to keep a copy of the agreement you signed. You have to give that piece of paper to the workers. You are not allowed to even keep a copy of the paper you signed. Crown attorneys and victim service workers. This is a copy of a letter that a mother sent to me. She was out of Ottawa, a young woman in Ottawa. She said, her and her ex got in a bit of wasn't anything physical. She just said they yelled at some kind of a yelling match type of thing. And so she thought she would call the cops and teach her husband a lesson. And, because most of the supposedly alleged victims of domestic violence, and I'm not saying that there aren't some victims, there are some men and women who are being victimized. But she just called the police hoping that they would get her husband to cool off, maybe tell him to go and settle down. But it turned their lives upside down, and it made life a living hell, as she referred to. Said, currently my spouse and I are in the midst of a living hell as a result of police and government policies. The lives of my son, my spouse, and my young child have literally been torn apart by the draconian domestic violence policies currently in place in this province. So as she said in her letter, and this letter went out to the Attorney General of Ontario, she said there was no hitting, no physical abuse. We were just arguing. And she called 911. And little did she realize the destruction that would be rained down on her family as a result of that call. And as she says further in her letter here, within moments of calling 911, the police showed up at her door, ready to take him away. He was hauled away like an animal before I had a chance to speak to officers to explain why. From the very moment the police walked in the door, I was left with the impression that the police felt that my spouse was guilty and that all they wanted was a conviction. The police told me that what I said was all that the judge would listen to, and that my spouse wouldn't mean a thing to anyone. So they even went off to one of the, in this case here, the officers went and told her to cash one of her checks, or whatever it is, and keep the money for herself. I run across this so often, I can't remember, yeah. So again, she further describes here how she was directed for services for women. Everyone along the chain kept on telling her how to destroy her husband, how to get rid of him, how to dump him. During my involvement with her, she prepared an affidavit to reveal the truth. She wrote an affidavit, she swore it, and then she was threatened that she might get charged for telling a different story from what the police had reported in their notes. So as she said here in her closing, they only seemed concerned about getting a conviction. She says here about the fabric of society. Okay. I have a young son, and it strikes fear in my heart to think that this could happen to him when he gets older. In just one phone call, everything our family worked for and had built up for the future, for our future, was put at risk. The government seems all too eager to step in and destroy the father to my child with no regards to the lives of others that could be affected. I get this quite regularly. Women calling up, especially when Children's Aid Society are involved. You know, there's some minor incident, they come in, and then they're told, the Children's Aid Society will say, if you do not stop the father from seeing the children, we are going to take them away from you. So now they got the mothers scared. So what they do is they separate the mother and the father, they separate the children, use the children as a weapon to force them to separate. And here you got a father now who's been completely taken out of the lives of his family. He's got no place to live. He's an easy target to plead guilty. Because then they go back with the, oh, here's what you can do. We'll let you go back home. You sign a peace bond here and agree that you're guilty. And that's what they're after. Now they've got a statistic that says men are abusive and women are victims. But that's how they do it. They isolate, separate, and terrorize. And that's what they do. Stop them from talking. One of the problems this is creating is that we are getting this abuse of the system now. People using the system, whether it's police services, children's aid, family courts, they're using the system now. And this is a recent quote of a judge here where he talked about where we're now burdening the justice system in this country. And I believe it's going to get to a point where it's going to collapse because the sheer weight of all this abuse is going to, I think, bring this justice system down. I had a flyer here. In fact, you know, Tilla's got some there. This is a flyer that I just brought in this morning from the person who called me just a few minutes ago on the phone. This is a letter that he received from his ex's lawyer. This is May 19th, 2015. We're talking just a couple, 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is a letter that he got. He went to the daycare to pick his son up. He got off work early, so he went to pick his daycare son up 3 hours early on a Friday. Or on a Tuesday night, I guess. Sorry, because he picks Tuesdays and Fridays. Anyways, if you notice here, the daycare provider has now been instructed that she is not to release Deegan, which is the name of the boy, to you before 4 p.m., and that if you attend before p.m. and insist on taking your own son, because it's a nice afternoon, take him to the park, she's going to call the police and abuse our police services even more and allege. Now, this guy's been thrown in jail for, I think, about 4 or 5 times already for stupid things like this. He spent 17 days in jail for sending flowers one time after they had recently broken up. This is a picture of the police cruiser at his door just about a week and a half ago because he He picked the child up. The mother wasn't even there. He went to the daycare provider's house. He gets home, and the OPP show up at his house with allegations that the mother was claiming that the child was at an imminent risk of harm because of his mental condition. She wasn't even there. She was sitting at home. He went and picked the child up at a daycare provider. Luckily, he had recorded his interaction with the daycare provider. Everything went fine. He's got it all on tape because we got him trained beforehand. And that's one of the things we teach parents to do, is to educate and record everything. But this is what's going on. Waste of police services. In fact, there was an article I recently found here. The lawyers, this is back in 2012, pointing out that criminal charges in family cases are being used far too often. Again, domestic violence, false allegations of domestic violence are being made. I may have got these slides a little bit out of order here, but getting back to the fact that when you arrest somebody, take away their kids, you put a restraining order so they can't talk to each other, you now use these tools against accused to get them to plead guilty. I see this all the time. People come back and say, well, I really didn't do it, but I had no choice. My lawyer told me just to sign it so I could get out of jail. Children's aid societies, their involvement with domestic violence. Again, as I said a little while ago, parental conflict is a primary reason why they take kids out these days. I hear it over and over again. This happens to be, I don't know if anybody knows cars, that's a Humvee. Probably one of the, unless you're getting, I don't know, maybe one of these Porsches or something like that. I don't know, these cars must be worth, what, $150,000 a year? These Humvees here? Well, that's the executive director of a children's aid society. Supposedly they're getting taxpayers' money that's supposed to go to help support families and children, and you know what? Well, I can see where the money's going. That is a pretty expensive car. Most people in the private sector wouldn't be able to afford that kind of vehicle. Domestic violence issues involving lawyers and judges. As I said, 95% of the people I've spoken to in the last 20 years, they all say their lawyers let them down. They either didn't get value for the money that they spent, or their lawyers actually sold them out, and they actually believe their lawyers were working for the other side. As soon as they run out of money, that's it. And this is an article out of Maclean's magazine. That stirred quite a bit of controversy back at the time. So, I mean, Maclean's is a pretty large magazine, had a lot of followers there. These are just some of the, these slides here are kind of representative of what's going on out there. You make these domestic violence calls to police. First thing is, I'm going to separate you from your children. I'm going to make it an offense for you to contact them. And then I'm going to call you a deadbeat, and basically you destroy the father. I see this happening so often. Again, another typical cartoon that representative of what's going on today in the courts. I'm not sure how this plays up here. These are just typical slides and typical cartoons and things that are coming from the public domain that are representative of what people feel, what is going on out there. Children themselves are saying judges should be ashamed for what's going on. And lawyers. How is my time, Mattel? I don't know how long I've been on here.
Pretty good. We just kind of get going toward the end.
Yeah, okay. Now, certainly in my 20 years, some suggested things to maybe reduce this problem. First of all, there certainly is a gender bias within the police, the court system, a lot of these services. There's no doubt. There has to be a change in the way these agencies work. Policies and procedures should not focus on arresting people, but they should focus on how to reduce domestic violence incidents with minimal damage to families and the community. Restorative justice with a focus on diversion of parties out of the justice system should be the focus, not zero tolerance. Ontario introduced a policy, they call it zero tolerance, a number of years ago. Automatic arrest. But it's causing so much harm and destruction to families, it's unheard of, in other parts of the world, what's going on. There may be some other countries that it seems to be more in the, the industrialized countries where a lot of this is going on. But we say that there should be some kind of a diversion program. And I guess what I say is that if it's the first offense, someone calls the police, the mother calls the police or whatever, and it's the first time there's been an incident, unless there is some very serious injury, somebody's bleeding, somebody's got a black eye or something, that the police should not lay charges, but that the couple should be automatically diverted to a mandatory program where they are educated about what's going to happen if there's another call. Because that's what I find is wrong. A lot of people, especially women, they call up, well, they think the police are going to teach their husbands a lesson. So they react out of emotion, not understanding what the true consequences are going to be to themselves or their children. And then it gets out of control. So we believe that there should be a diversion to educate first so that everybody knows what's going to happen when you make that 911 call. And if people make it a second time, well, then people can't say, well, we didn't know. You got to get into neutral training. There should be things like a 48-hour cooling down period for couples before they get into it. And I talked about this here, about the mandatory course. Another problem that we're seeing more of, not only in this area, but as I think there's been a lot of worldwide attention now, is about police violence now. And one of the things we talked about here is that police in domestic violence calls should be wearing should have video recording equipment on their badges or on. They've got the equipment now. It's readily available. Because what we're finding now, and I find this all the time, police are twisting the words and they are misreporting in their notes what really happened. And they're putting their own twist on it. There's too much emphasis on arrest, conviction, rather than on trying to change the system to reconciliate and try to get the family back and to save society a lot of money. A number of people in this movement know, too, that for years, women's shelters and women's rights movements, advocates have been going in and providing judges with their own training. Special training to the judges that is not on the public record. These are special, behind the scenes, secret training to the judges where only one side of the equation is being taught to the judges. There should be some abuse shelters. In fact, I think there's one gentleman, organization Cafe has talked about it. There's one gentleman who's, I think, in a hunger strike in front of Queen's Park trying to get a shelter. And certainly, video equipment should be used as much as possible now because we certainly have seen a lot of twisting of facts. Children will say something, whether it's the police, Children's Aid, Victim Services, these other agencies, will turn it around and make it appear something completely different. A kid will say to a worker, well, I'm not afraid of my dad, I want to see my dad. Yet they'll write in their notes, the children expressed that they were fearful of their father. So this is wrong. They need to be using recording devices. Here's a sample of a body-mounted recording devices that police, and this slide here I think I got about a year ago. It's probably outdated already. They've got even smaller equipment now. I think in this one slide here, most officers have that walkie-talkie that they carry on their side, which is always there, and they have the microphone there. Well, that microphone has a camera and audio recorder built right into it. So it's the same equipment as they carry now, except it can record. both video and audio. Here's an interesting slide. I don't think I've shown this at any presentation. I dug this out a few days ago. But here is a picture of a case I was involved in where there was a very abusive mother. She had a history with the Child Protection Agency. There was a record of her abusing the children. The children reported being abused, being beaten. I spoke to the boy myself. Yet, when she went to family court, and this boy was in foster care for a while to protect him from his mother, but when she went to court, the Child Protection Agency and the courts decided that this boy would be best left in the care of his mother. And he had a very loving father available. Good home to go to. Read what is on his t-shirt. It says, "Kill Mom." I know this boy today. He's now in his late 20s. Hates girls. Never had a girlfriend. He doesn't have any friends. Because I talked to one of his other relatives. He doesn't have any friends. He sits in a basement most of the time. I say that what the court and the Children's Aid have done to this boy, their actions are turning children like this, they're manufacturing our future murderers, women haters, and rapists. And it's the system that's done this. And in this case here too, the mother made a false allegation that the father had kicked her. Now, there were no bruises. I'm very familiar with the case. I've seen all the documentation. Okay? There was absolutely no proof, just the allegation that he had kicked her one day. But they decided that he's best with the person that he wants to kill. And I spoke to his sister, who says the same thing. She says, "My mother is nuts. She's crazy. She has bipolar disorder." I've learned in recent years it's what people would refer to as a sociopath now. At that time, years ago, I didn't know what a sociopath was, but I understand now because a sociopath can appear to the public to be quite normal. They can hold a job, they can appear to be quite normal. But behind the scenes, especially in their own home, they can literally destroy a child and not to be seen on the outside unless those who closely know the family. That's a pretty scary picture. Okay, I think every weapon imaginable to man is in that picture there. And this kid was only I think he was about 10 years old at the time. I can see everything from missiles to guns and all those little blotches in there. Those are bullets being fired at him. Okay. Anyways, that's the end of, I think I'm within my time, am I? But that's basically been my experience, though, is that it really is a tragedy that this is going on today. And every week I get phone calls, just as I did about half an hour ago or an hour ago, from people where this is happening. And it's got to stop. And anyways, that's all I've got to say, and thank you very much for the opportunity to just have my say.
Before I let you go, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Beck?
Walk around with that questions.
Thanks. So, I'm not sure if you know this, but do you know when this kind of domestic violence industry, to put it that way, when did it start ramping up? Like when did courts start getting involved deeply within family disputes. There's always been, I'm guessing, police being involved in domestic violence to some extent into protecting children, but when did this really becoming where every aspect of the family dispute is litigated by the courts?
Well, I've been in this industry for about 20 years, about 1995. And prior to that, I became separated I had 2 kids, I guess, I'm trying to even remember the year. It's been quite a few years now. My kids are in their 40s now. But I went through a separation with my first wife, and I had 2 children. And we agreed that I would keep the children. I raised 2 girls on my own. And I didn't see this stuff back then. Let's see, this would be 72, maybe before 1980. I think separated was probably around 1978, 79. I took custody of 2 daughters, who were about 6 and 7 at the time, and I raised them as a single dad. I never bothered with child support. I raised my 2 girls. They went to see their mother whenever they wanted to. And to this day, I can still, their mother still comes around to my house if there's a family get-together or birthday party. From what I can best pull together, it seemed to be around somewhere in the 1980s, where I think this kind of started, where this more aggressive approach to domestic violence started coming in the 80s. As I said, when I went through it back in the late, almost just before the 80s, I never got any bad letters from lawyers. They worked out an agreement. Even my ex's lawyer, we worked out an agreement. It was all over and done with, and we went on with our lives. There was no domestic violence or anything like that, but I didn't see any of the aggression back then. But family law, I think what's happened is that family law has become a growing industry. Some lawyers have told me that family law is the most lucrative area of law to be in. So from the best I can determine, it was probably somewhere in the 80s. And I think that there was government funding started to come in at that point. Some of these groups were successful maybe in getting funding for their causes, and I think it just spiraled out of control from there. Each year groups try to get more money, more funding, and of course then it just goes out of control from there. Sometimes when I'm talking to people, and sometimes many individuals say to me, they say, I can't understand, why is this going on? Why is the court like this? Why are the police doing this? Why? This is what people say to me all the time, and I have to explain to them, is that why back in, I think it's the 17th century, why would cause a whole community to suddenly believe that lady over there is a witch and we got to go burn her? What would cause this mass belief that something is terribly wrong? Okay? You could go through history. Go back as recently as go to the Second World War. Look at Nazi Germany. I'm sure that all Germans weren't bad people. There are probably very many good people. What caused people to suddenly believe that the Jewish people were bad, were things like this? Well, I was looking at, on the History Channel, they talked about some of this, about the advertising. That Hitler put out advertising to say, well, these people are, they are earning all the money, they're stealing from the poor. And yet, you can get a whole society believing something like that. So it's like a crowd mentality. You get, I've had some police officers say, there are only a few bad apples in our group, but it's the bad apples that control the whole force. And I think that's what's happening in many of the sectors that we deal with domestic violence or with family courts. You have this culture where the workers believe that they have got to do it this way, do what they're being told to do, and if you don't, you're either going to lose your job, you're going to get fired or whatever. I have a sister who I was alienated from, and I met for the first time in 50 years, just a little over a year ago. I was separated Not because of family or anything like that. I mean, this was many years ago. It was because of poorness. My father and mother separated. My sister was put into another family and was alienated from me. We didn't see each other for more than 50, I think it was almost 55 years. We met each other for the first time about a year ago. And it's been a wonderful awakening. So I, too, have experienced parental alienation in a slightly different form. Now, one of the things she described, she has gone to church all her life. She is an excellent person in the community, hard worker, very well respected in the community. She said that she went down to a women's shelter. She wanted to volunteer. She thought, I'm going to go and do some good, help these poor women. And she went in there, and she said she got the interview, and she was starting to being asked these questions. And she said, well, I would do my best to help them both. We want to try to help the kids. We want to do this. These are my beliefs, And she said during the interview, she said, I started getting this strange feeling that I was giving them the wrong answers. And yeah, even though they were looking for volunteers, and she was an excellent candidate, she was not accepted. And she told me it was because of my views to try to bring fairness to the fathers, the mothers, the children, that she was not accepted. And she said, I figured it out after that I'm glad I didn't get a job there. She said, and I probably will never ask to work there again. Does that answer your question? We got a little bit off topic there.
You said in the 80s something happened, something triggered to make domestic violence become a central issue. And I'm just wondering, that's when the Mark Lepine incident occurred, in the early 80s, right?
That's when what occurred?
The Mark Lepine incident in Quebec. And do you not think that the industry maybe started out with good intentions, and then over the years it kind of, took a whole different turn? Is that possible?
I certainly agree with you. I think most businesses, most agencies, most governments start off with good intentions. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we could go throughout history. There's all kinds of scandals. Look at the Ontario government right now, Liberal government, about all this, the emails disappearing, okay? And I think you're right, is that this culture sets in, and I think Senator Cools and maybe Aaron Pizzey, I think there are other speakers, they'll be talking about this as well. But yes, you get special interests, they try to take over, and they bring their way of doing things into something, and they take it over. And yes, you're right, things change. Mm-hmm. And then they become, whether they become radicalized or they, this is what's happening, I believe, in the domestic violence industry. They now many of these agencies will only hire people who think the same, who will do the same as those who are already in power there. This is pretty typical in any organization. You could even get corporations, the same thing. You start getting abuse, police, right. Same thing.
Okay, so you've been around for a while, and I'm just wondering, from your experience in the 70s and 80s, did you personally maybe see that there could be a need for domestic violence against women? Did seem to be pretty, it happened quite a bit around that period. So do you not think that there was a real genuine need for domestic violence industry during that time?
In my earlier years, I would say no. I was probably just a typical parent. Yeah. I was a young father. I had kids. Never really thought of this back and then. I wouldn't say you'd really see it in the newspapers or see it on TV. It didn't seem to be really a thought. I'm a baby boomer, and I guess when I had children, I guess it was in 1972 is when my first child was born. I was only 20. I guess I was a little over 20 at the time. I'm trying to forget my age here now. I got to watch where. Yeah. But basically, we weren't really aware of those issues. It was a young family, and you see this today as well. I find that most people who get sucked into this, get dragged into this domestic violence or family court or sharper, they don't understand what's going on, that there's this industry that's there. And suddenly they find themselves in it with absolutely no concept of what it's all about. So I don't think most people don't actually understand it until it happens to them, or until it happens to somebody that's close to them or someone they know, really, even their own children. So hard to say, but I would say my best guess is that somewhere in the 80s something started to, and I think it had to do with money. I think government money started to flow into some of these programs, and they've just grown exponentially since then to a point now where we talk about pendulums. And you know what? Some of us say that the pendulum, is way up here.
Yeah.
But it's starting to go the other way. I am seeing.
A lot of us are thinking that it was maybe third wave feminism, which was totally separated from the first wave, which might have had this effect of totally distorting.
It's possible. The work that I do has not really been so much gender-based. Canada Court Watch, we've been primarily dealing with the courts in general injustices, whether it's mums or dads. I'd probably say about half of the work, half of the parents I help, in fact, maybe even more than half, are actually mothers. And even they complain about the domestic violence because they're being pushed to get rid of their fathers, their husbands, and the children. That's what a lot of them complain about now. They're being victimized now by the system. That answer your question?
It does, thank you.
I actually want to bring something to the forefront here. I recall some time ago that there was a pamphlet or a brochure that was found in grade schools to do with teaching children that fathers and men are going to beat them. And it was kind of removed from the schools fairly quickly. I don't know if you could talk about that, if you remember.
I honestly, I don't recall that brochure in the schools about that. I haven't personally can testify to that.
Maybe it might have been somewhere else.
Yeah.
And just the last question that I'd like to ask you is, why do you think that the abuse of men and boys is ignored by all of the domestic violence industry? What could be the reason for that?
Well, as I said earlier, I think there's kind of this culture mentality that's been built in, and a lot of the people who are in these positions and who are running these organizations have their own personal biases against men for some reason or another. Some of them have been, maybe they've been victimized, had a bad relationship themselves. And basically they're carrying their own personal opinions and that into their professional careers. And some of it, I think, has to do with human nature as well. I think you could ask your question, what is it that attracts most people to become a police officer? Well, quite often they'll find that it's a person who they want to have a gun. They want to have a gun, and quite often these people want to have that feeling of power over another person. That's why you're getting these videos that are showing up lately. Police shooting kids in the back, and I'm seeing this abuse of power. We're starting to get recordings now because parents are recording stuff. Okay, we're now getting these recordings. Police officers being secretly recorded, saying things such as, "The judge doesn't give a shit about you in family court. Okay, you're going to get creamed. Forget it. You're a guy." The police are saying things like this. Okay, and as I showed you earlier, young teenagers being arrested, handcuffed for no reason. So I think also there's a human element that in some of these organizations it becomes a matter of power. They don't know how to control their power. They get used to it. Children's aid agency workers are the same thing. You have social workers, and I shouldn't say social workers in Ontario here because most of them aren't, but you have these child protection workers who are exercising their power and their ability to control other people through their position. So this is what you're having. We're getting a culture. And as I see our friend Walter has come in here, and he often mentions the term when we talk about the Second World War, about the people who ran the trains. And I always remember that. And it brings that, I guess, that concept about why do people do things? And in a crowd or when they're in an organization, it's abuse of power and authority that potentially is within all of us. And I think it's, it is something in human nature that does affect a percentage of people. Why is there good people and there are going to be bad people? It's the makeup of our civilization, it's the makeup of people. And I think some of the maybe people that are more bad get drawn into some of these places where they are allowed to abuse their power and authority. But one thing we do have going for us today, and I said that when I first started in this industry 20 years ago, one thing we do have going for us, social media is throughout history. You can go back 2,000 years. This is the first time in history that civilization has created the internet, has created the ability to videotape, created the ability to audio tape, and to make people accountable today. And I think this is one of the forces, one of the tools that's going to start to change the world to a better place. We're slowly seeing it. I think some of these videos you're seeing, especially with the police down in the U.S. right now, are what's starting to happen. And as you know, in Toronto here now, they're doing the experiment now where the Toronto police are wearing video cameras or on them now.
Well, the problem is they turn it on when they want to.
Well, I think it's only a matter of time until someone complains that certain things were said when the camera was off, that you're going to maybe see those policies changed in time.
Well, Vern, thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you very much. Now, let's see here. I'm just trying to figure out. Oh, there it goes, sir. It wasn't working there, so.